Good evening, everyone. It being 7:02 and a quorum present, I'm going to call this July 24 meeting of the Plymouth Planning Board to order. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency and signed into law on March 29, 2023, this meeting will be conducted via remote and in-person participation. Those looking for information as to participation at this or future planning board meetings can find the information on the town's website. First on our agenda tonight are administrative notes, beginning with approval of prior minutes for June 26, 2024. Have the members of the board had an opportunity to review those minutes? Mm-hmm. Are there any comments, changes, questions? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to adopt the minutes of June 26, 2024.
Mr. Grandy moves to adopt the minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Bennett seconds. As Ms. Keene is remote this evening, we will do a roll call vote. Begin with Ms. Keene.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Grandy?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Next on our agenda, covenants, plans, and releases, we have B437, Pine Hills, Birdsong Lots 10-676 through 10-689, and S-304 and S-305. Any questions from members of the board? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Mr. Grandy moves approval.
Second.
Mr. Bennett seconds. Again, I will call the roll. Mr. Grandy?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Ms. Keene?
Abstain.
And I vote yes. Next on our agenda, we move to a site plan review. 144 Industrial Park Drive, construction of a two-story, 24,000 square foot office building in a unified complex. Good evening, Mr. D'Ambrosio.
All right, folks, is this thing on? Can you hear me okay? For the record, Attorney Rob D'Ambrosio with D'Ambrosio Law here in Plymouth. Good evening, nice to see everyone, and you too, Ms. Keene, on video. So we are here tonight seeking your advisory recommendation to inspectional services pursuant to site plan review for an existing unified complex at 144 Industrial Park Road. I think sometimes the address may appear as 5 Resnick Road, as this site has sort of mutated over time. Let's see, can I, Lauren, control? Oh, there we go, okay. Actually, can I get to the site plan? Is that possible to switch over? Yeah. Yeah, I know. I just got the PDF and then I'll come back to this. Well, actually, if I could, sorry, Lee, is there the one that's the kind of engineered plan, not the landscape plan, the non-colorized plan that shows the layout? Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, I can just scroll through. It sounds like Lee.
It's on this one? This one?
Yeah, there's 18 pages. Yep. Oh, perfect.
All right.
Thank you. Sorry to make you do that.
You should be.
All right.
Clean your glasses.
I don't know if this mouse has juice here. Okay, looks like
I
I'm
liked it
driving.
better before.
Okay, there we go. Oh,
One or two?
One or two?
Okay, I just wanted to show you, this is perfect, this is great, thank you. So you guys can see the screen, I just wanted to give you sort of an overview. I've got Bill Shaw here with me, our civil engineer, who can do better justice to the site plan than I can, and he can field some specific questions if there are any, but I want to give you kind of the overview. So this is the unified complex site. In 2013, this site was approved as a unified complex, and there were 3 24,000 square foot buildings approved for the site as a unified complex. And again, as you're aware, a unified complex allows multiple principal structures on a single lot, with the possibility of reducing parking, shared infrastructure, et cetera. So those 3 buildings were identical in footprint, and 2 of them, in fact, have been built, although one ended up only being a 1-story building, this one here. So you've got a 12,000 square foot single level structure here over by Plimpton Road. You've got a 24,000 square foot 2-level building here. This self-storage facility was approved by this board a couple years ago, and that's my client that owns this one. And then we're here tonight seeking to site plan approval for this structure, which again will be another 24,000 square foot office building in the exact same footprint and location as was initially contemplated in 2013 for the site. I think the key item here to present to you is our request that we not be required to institute the number of parking spaces that the parking table in the bylaw would require if we were to be by the book and not make use of the unified complex relief available to us under section 2031D, I believe. So I'm going to try to switch to the slideshow to talk about parking here. Here it is. All right. Let's see if I can do. Now, oh, here we go. Okay, good. There we go. So anyway, I think on Zoom we may have my client, WMG Plymouth owner number 2 LLC. Anthony Scavo is the manager over there. We may have Zoe Daniel here as well. As I mentioned, I've got Mr. Shaw with me. We've also got our landscape architect, John Henson, available on Zoom. So again, just to rehash a bit of what I mentioned here, this site has been reviewed and in some way, shape, or form has been approved by this board for various purposes over the years. The parking most recently was deemed adequate, the existing parking for the self-storage use and the existing office buildings. Now again, I've presented to this board before, maybe not everyone who's here tonight, but this board on other self-storage projects, as I think you're aware, and I'm going to demonstrate tonight. The parking that the bylaw requires for self-storage, it's kind of a square peg in a round hole. For lack of a better category, because there is no self-storage category, inspectional services is always deemed self-storage to fall within the warehousing use category for purposes of parking requirements. That requires 1 parking space per 1,500 square feet. That's a monstrous amount of parking for a self-storage facility, particularly one of a typical size like this, which is, I think we're 111,000 square feet. That would be a huge parking field that wouldn't be utilized. So, again, just to kind of rehash where we are, and I know you've seen this in staff's memorandum, but we are proposing to implement additional parking to what's there now. There will be 2 parking fields on either side of this to-be-constructed 24,000 square foot office building, each 24 spaces for an additional 48 spaces beyond what's there now. That would bring the total on-site to 315 parking spaces. Now again, if we go with that 1 space per 1,500 square feet of self-storage, that's 18% fewer spaces than a calculation based on 60,000 square feet of office and 111,000 square feet of quote-unquote warehousing space would require. Fortunately, we have section 2031D of the zoning bylaw, which gives this board discretion to allow a reduction in parking. And again, the theory here is the unified complex zoning relief or zoning bylaw provisions are designed to allow denser use of the scarce commercial space and industrial space in the town. So when you have the ability to put more, make better use, more dense use of a site for commercial or industrial purposes, that's what this unified complex bylaw provision is for. And again, it would allow you to reduce parking by up to 33%. We're asking for roughly half of that permitted or contemplated reduction under the zoning bylaw. So I guess what I would tell you is, if one way to think of it is 315 spaces is the 300 that you'd need for the 60,000 square feet of office space that's on-site and proposed to be erected on-site, and that would still leave another 15 spaces for the self-storage facility. Your question may be, is 15 spaces enough? I'd tell you, I think it's more than enough. That works out to almost 1 1/3 spaces per 10,000 square feet of storage. For the sake of comparison, this board had recommended to the ZBA, and the ZBA approved in 2020, I believe, a larger self-storage facility at Natalie Way. It used to be the athletic complex, the indoor athletic facility that was converted to self-storage. That was 122,000 square feet, and this board and the ZBA saw fit to allow it to reduce parking to 12 parking spaces, again, about 1 per 10,000 feet. So if you could do the math, what's that, about 25% less parking, I think, on a per square foot basis than our facility. Here's some data. I'll confess this is the data I presented in 2020, but I don't think the market has changed a whole lot. You can get a flavor here for what other self-storage facilities provide in terms of parking. As you kind of scroll through this table with a number of kind of greater Boston sites, and you can see none provides more than 14 parking spaces. And again, that ratio ranges from 1.86 square feet per 1.86 spaces, I'm sorry, per square feet to about half a space per 10,000 square feet. So again, we're squarely within that range, and it seems to work fine elsewhere. I guess I should point out this facility has also been operational for about a year, and the parking use has been very light, and the parking's been more than sufficient in terms of the immediately adjacent existing parking field. Again, I'll give you another comp here on Holman Road. That's a larger facility, again, about 20,000 square feet larger than ours, and they have 5 parking spaces. That's been there for quite some time. I'm not aware of any issue on site there. Again, just another data point here, national data point. That data is a bit older, 2012, but again, you can get an idea for what the average number of parking spaces is, you know, for facilities like this. And again, you can see it's nowhere near 1 space per 1,500 square feet. Again, this is just for basic comparison. A municipality that does have a self-storage category for parking requires, you know, far fewer spaces, and they don't even care what size your facility is. You could have a 200,000 square foot self-storage facility, and again, they would tell you that 6 parking spaces would suffice. Just the nature of the use doesn't lend itself to a large number of simultaneous visits, as you might imagine. Again, more statistics here, you know, based on rentable square footage. This is the number of vehicle trips. So again, to the extent that you want to try to do some alchemy and determine how many spaces are used at once based on trips, again, if you've got 20, 25, 30 visits a day, you're not likely to need more than 5 or 6 spaces at a given time. Again, we're offering 15 effectively. So that's my presentation relative to parking. Again, I can go back to the layout. We're preserving 36% of the site as green space. You know, it's already equipped and contemplated for town sewer, town water. The infrastructure's there. We think it's a ideal use of the unified complex provisions of the zoning bylaw, but I'm happy to field any questions, and so is Mr. Shaw. Thank you.
Thank you. To staff first, please.
Sure. So I think that Attorney D'Ambroso went through a pretty good explanation of the use. I won't repeat that. Just a few highlights: that the architecture that they're proposing is consistent with the architecture of the 3 other office buildings that are there now. So we have a building that will look the same as the other 2 that are there. There is no earth removal proposed as part of this project. The landscaping plan is one of the better ones I've seen in a while. It has a very a decent amount of landscaping. And I just point out too that unlike some of the ones we see, they're speccing out 3 to 3.5 inch caliper trees. So they have a decent sized trees also that they're proposing. Snow storage is going to be in the slope between the self-storage facility and the parking, so they'll be able to push the snow up onto that slope for snow storage. And the 18%, again, I think from a staff standpoint, we're always trying to encourage fewer spaces whenever possible. So that 18% reduction is certainly within the range of ones we've seen before. And I think whenever we can do that, that's great. I would point out that there's still 10 by 18 parking spaces. It's not the size that's reduced. It's just the number. And again, they have that 33% open space and off of Plimpton Road that they're also keeping for open space too. So again, we recommend that you notify the building commissioner that this is a unified complex, and it's a nice one, and it fits in nicely, I think, with what's there already. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll bring it to the board first for questions for Mr. D'Ambrosio. I'll start with Mr. Bennett.
Evening. I think it's probably more a question for Mr. Shaw. Mentions in the narrative that there's a retaining wall to be constructed. So my question is that going to be a fill area? In other words, the site's going to be raised, or is it going to be a cut?
Cut, and it's right, let me see. It- Oh, okay. So the wall is right along here, and its tallest point is 6 feet high, and it's a cut wall.
Okay, so the site, the parking will be below the sight line from
That's right.
Commerce Way,
That's right.
rather than
And-
elevated above
and
it.
It's because there's an existing slope there now that comes down to the base, and we're going into that by about 18 feet and making the 6-foot wall. Tapers to 0 on either side, and we've got a fence across the top of that to make sure that nobody has a problem with it.
Okay, I think that's really the only question I have. I think the preservation of 36% green space, a reduction of pervious surfaces makes for a good project.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Ms. Keen, questions, comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grandy?
Thank you. I'm looking at the conditions that staff and their recommendations. It mentions and strongly encourages the installation of bicycle rack and EV charging stations noted on the plan. Is your intent to install the EV charging stations? Is my question.
Yeah, I'd have to speak with my client about that. I probably should have raised that, as I did have a chance to look at these proposed conditions. Oh, do you have intel on that, Bill?
Bill Shaw again. So we presented it to the client. They're entertaining it. They think it might be a good idea. They're just wondering whether they have to or not. And from what I can tell, it's trending in that direction anyways, that in fact, by the time they're done or near done for construction, that it'd probably be an asset as opposed to.
I know of a couple of towns, anytime you're working on a parking lot or a structure, you end up, they're requiring you to put them in. I wouldn't say it's a requirement, and it's not a requirement in Plymouth that I'm aware of, although it's noted on the plans.
Yeah, we showed it on the plan, and we showed the bike racks on the plan and said, okay, at the owner's discretion, where they get placed is we'll come back in and show you or the staff at your discretion.
So the intention is highly light is going to happen?
Yep.
Oh, okay. That was my question. Other than that, I think the conditions that are listed here, 1 through 6, meet the requirements, and I think it's a good project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grandy. I have no questions for Mr. D'Ambrosio. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to comment regarding this project? Is there anyone online who wishes to offer comment on this project? Okay, seeing none, I will bring it back to the board to entertain a vote. Do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion to recommend issuance of the permit.
Mr. Bennett moves that we recommend to the building inspector site plan approval per the unified complex,
With the conditions that are listed,
always with the conditions that are listed as part of
okay,
the...
I will second the motion.
And Mr. Grandy seconds the motion. Further discussion? Then I will call the roll. Ms. Keen?
I'll abstain.
Mr. Grandy,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes?
and I vote yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on our agenda this evening is a report from the Plymouth Center Steering Committee.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to give you a little bit of a, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's always helpful to
I
point
go
that
lower.
down as best you can.
I don't want to break it. Okay.
I
Can you
got
hear
you.
me now? Thank you for giving us the opportunity. I had hoped to have our committee here, however, it's been a busy month, and to let them know the last minute that I'd like to. So next time we come, we will have everyone. We have a great group. We have not met in July, but we've met the previous months prior to. We usually meet the first Wednesday of the month. However, there are times when proposals come in and we cannot wait for that first Wednesday of the month, as the time frames during which we have to send our recommendations to the Planning Board and ZBA do not allow for this to occur. The members consist of myself as the current chair, Andrea Melville, vice chair, Carol Ropinian, clerk, Harrison Quinn, Charles McKenna, and our newest member, Bob Edwards. Detective Robert Shaw is our liaison from the Community Connection team with the police department and attends our meetings as well. All steering committees now have a liaison, excuse me, with the police department, which I think is great. David Peck previously was our planning board connection, and Carl Donaldson now is our planning board representative. Unfortunately, I did not know this when we met on June 5th. I believe he was appointed during that month, and I think it probably was an appointment that occurred after we met on June 5th, but he will be invited, obviously, to the next meetings. This year, we met January, February, March, May, June, and have intentions of meeting this month. We already have a proposal before us. September 4th, October 2nd, November 6th, and December 4th. We have also met with Precinct 3 on a few occasions in conjunction with our interests in the survey done on our streets in Plymouth. We had concerns that there were no recommendations given to us initially in that survey that suggested streets be made one-way. There has been considerable discussion regarding one-way streets among our committee members, as well as with precinct members of Precinct 3. Among the streets we would like to see made one-way possibly are Chilton, Clifton, Nelson, Lothrop. We do have one-way streets through the center of town already in place: Leiden, Middle, North, Howland, Memorial Drive, South Russell, School, North Russell, so it's not unique. Realized this is not within our jurisdiction, but it is of interest to our committee. I personally was very concerned with the rail trail crossing at Nelson Street, as it is not a benign crossing, such as exists at the end of Atlantic, Robbins Road. Nelson is a gateway to the waterfront for a lot of traffic. However, concerns were expressed, and as a result, the crossing at Nelson appears to be working very, very well. Most traffic does slow at that crossing, so that's a good thing. I think we made a lot of noise about that, and I think what they did there to calm traffic was great. We normally review special permits only which involve our area, not site plans. It is my opinion the Plymouth Center Steering Committee should review site plans as well, but that's a side issue. I was also told that we do not review special permits regarding single or multifamily houses. I'm extremely pleased that our town staff has been very willing to meet with us with any concerns we have had. I can't say enough about the cooperation we have had among the town staff. Our next meeting will be regarding an expansion of a pre-existing non-conforming structure at 120 Rear Water Street, which is the building behind Ziggy's on the waterfront. that has not been scheduled yet. It's an expansion, and of course, everything has been submitted in compliance. We recently had a Plymouth PCIS student come before us to explain a need for a crosswalk installed on Allerton Street at Seaver Street. This was a request from one of our Plymouth Center Steering Committee members, who is a teacher, and it was his student who came before us. I personally welcome this, even though it was not the standard request from the town. It is important to get people involved, especially if we have an opportunity to have a student come before our committee. And it just so happens that James Downey was at that meeting, so the two not planned worked very, very well. And I think the student got an insight, too, of a little bit of town government, which I think is great to encourage. Our committee's description, unfortunately, was not in the 2023 annual book as it was submitted. I write the annual report with the existing members of the committee noted, as well as a map of our area, and for some reason the map was omitted, and the names of our 2023 committee as well. I would have liked to have had our committee appear tonight so you would know who we all are, but I failed to organize this prior to tonight. It's been, as I said, a very, very busy month. Thank you for taking the time for me to explain a little of our committee concerns. We, I think, enjoy each other's company at that meeting as well, and other items many times are brought out. And I think this is good because it's communication, which happens and can be very fruitful. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Ms. Montanari. That's been very helpful and very informative. Ms. Keene, any questions for the committee?
No, I just want to thank Claire for her presentation tonight, and I agree with you. It was nice to hear what the committee is up to, and thank you, Claire, for your presentation.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Keene. Mr. Grandy?
Yes, I'd just like to thank you for coming in tonight, and you can come in any night you'd like that we're here.
Thank you.
That's fantastic.
I would love to come in at some point so you'd be aware of who is on the committee and so forth.
That's great. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grandy. Mr. Bennett?
No questions, just echo my colleague's sentiments to thank you for your service.
You're very welcome.
Let me echo all of that and reiterate that the steering committees are welcome and encouraged to come before the planning board at any time to address any concerns that they have. You're correct that there are so-called limitations on your quote-unquote jurisdiction, but there are no limitations whatsoever on your ability to come to this board and ask us to step in on something, to weigh in, or to use whatever influence or abilities we have in order to address a concern. I think it's wonderful that people are coming to the steering committees to address whatever concerns that they may have. Our steering committees are the eyes and the ears of the planning board in their local villages, and that's the simple matter that we all can't be everywhere all at once. And I think it's wonderful that you have that. I think it was wonderful that a student felt that they could come in and talk to you. The fact that Mr. Downey was there was obviously very fortuitous, but if he weren't there, hopefully you can think of coming to us so that we or town staff can convey that onward so that we can all then follow on what's going on and make sure that we know where there are problems and how we address them. I certainly do want to say thank you very much, not only for your work, but for the kind words for staff. More often than not, staff hear nothing but grievances, gripes, and complaints that they are not being responsive. So it's wonderful to know that there are those who at least will be pointing out and recognizing how good they are. So thank you very much. We look forward to hearing from you again. We'll schedule something, but obviously anytime you, or obviously I'm going to say this to any steering committee, that they feel that they have an issue that they want to bring to the planning board, we want to hear from them. We will find a place on you for our agenda when that's appropriate. So
It's good to hear.
thank you so much for coming in. Greatly appreciated.
My pleasure.
Steve, I'm not sure if we have people here for the make piece. You might want to take that one next just to vote to accept the request to withdrawal, just in case someone's here for that.
Okay, certainly. So out of order, we're going to take on our agenda, Public Hearing B 543, ADM Agawam Development LLC, Red Brook. There was a proposal to create 54 residential lots, that there has been a request to withdraw that. Mr. Hartman, anything further from
I
that?
would just say that, again, comes out of the issues and discussion we had at the last meeting about the requirement for affordables, and we're still waiting for that process to go through town council and have some kind of recommendation to this board or council report to this board about the affordable requirements and how they react. So until we know what that is, I think we need to, put a hold on these until we know where we stand with the final unit count for the development. So that's still very much in progress.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman. Again, and for those who are tuning in or just not familiar, question has been raised as to the total number of units that is allowed to be constructed at Red Brook per its permitting and subsequent other agreements. A question that has some legal implications, so we've asked council to weigh in so that we make sure that whatever decision this board makes is based upon the documents, the law, and the interests of the town. And we want to make sure that all of those things converge in one place. So with that, I will ask the board whether or not they have any questions or issues with respect to, I see somebody who wants to comment. There's nothing before us, so I don't know what your comment is. We're not open to discussing the issue right now. Is there an issue regarding their withdrawal? Why don't we recognize the individual?
Yeah, so Robert, if you have your hand up if you'd like to speak.
Yeah, it's just a question, Robert Little. Is the discussion on the total number of proposed units, i.e. 54, or is it about the number of affordable units as a variable in that total count?
Well, the issue that has been raised that we're asking for council's opinion on is on the total number of units for Red Brook. The number of affordable units is defined. That's been established. There's no dispute over how many affordable units. The question that has been asked is whether or not they are inclusive or in addition to the base units that were identified in the permit. And we're waiting for council's determination on that.
Thank you very much. Is the number 54 a variable, or is that a fixed number?
The number 54 that you're seeing, that was a proposal for a specific use area. So that's not something that's even been addressed yet.
I see. And the adult affordable units, that is sort of a sideline issue and a more recent development, is that a part of this discussion?
Well, again, the discussion is what the total number of units will be allowed at Red Brook, whether they include the 113 agreed affordable units or they are in addition to the 113. That's the issue.
But I think the indication is that the Grantham project will move forward, and that's tentatively scheduled for August 14th for a site plan review by the planning board on that. So August 14th is when the board will review that affordable component senior housing.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very kindly, each of you.
Thank you very much for your questions. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Do we need to?
I would do a motion to accept the
Okay.
withdrawal.
Do I have a motion to accept the withdrawal?
Motion to accept the withdrawal.
Mr. Grandy,
B543 ADM Agawam Development LLC, Red Brook.
Mr. Grandy so moves. Is there a second?
Second?
Mr. Bennett seconds. I will call the roll. Ms. Keene?
I will again abstain.
Okay. Mr. Bennett?
Yes?
Mr. Grandy?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Okay, next on our agenda this evening, we have discussion for fall town meeting regarding allowance of the village open space development bylaw to be expanded within the waterfront district. Attorney Galvin?
Good evening, members of the planning board. My name is Attorney Robert Galvin. I'm a lawyer from Marshfield, and my office is in Duxbury. I have for your consideration tonight a request to consider support or sponsoring of an article to amend the village open space development bylaw in the town of Plymouth. I represent a gentleman by the name of Tom Drummond. Tom is to my left here. Tom is the owner of properties at number 4 and number 7 High Cliff Avenue in the northern section of Plymouth. He also owns an additional 4-acre parcel that's just to the north of 7 High Cliff Avenue. If you haven't been up to that area, it's a wonderful area. There are approximately 5 homes that are accessed off of High Cliff Avenue. It's just, I guess, closer to the ocean than the layout of the Old Colony Railroad. There's some easements down there. It's a very private area. The area is currently located in the waterfront district, and this is the northerly section of the waterfront district. The waterfront district has 2 main sections in the town of Plymouth, as I'm sure you're aware. This is the northerly extent of that district. The waterfront district runs down approximately to the town wharf, and then picks up again just south of the center at approximately Bradford Street, running down to Union Street. Those are the 2 areas of the waterfront district. So our proposal tonight is to add the village open space development option, which is a special permit granted by the planning board, to the waterfront district. My client would like to consider a flexible type of development that takes into account the ability to preserve some natural areas and provide a mixture of potential housing options on the additional 4 acres that he owns, and be provided the opportunity to negotiate something with the planning board that we think makes sense to everybody. We have some concept plans for his remaining land, but principally what he'd like to get underway right now is the redevelopment of the 2 existing homes and the possibility of developing the 4 acres, a significant portion of which we believe would be set aside as open space and for access to the beach area in this area. I included in my packet for you all the proposed zoning article, which has 2 components, and then I provided a map prepared by Merrill Engineers showing where the existing waterfront district is, and then kind of a blow-up of the area that my client's property is located in. My client and I met earlier this summer with Mr. Hardman, talked about some of the ideas that we had for development, and it seemed to me that, and seemed to us, that this probably is a very appropriate way to approach how we would develop this area. And I'll explain it to you, the changes. First of all, I want to tell you that there was one clerical error in the existing bylaw that Mr. Hardman brought to our attention that if we went forward with this article, we would propose to fix, and that is the elimination of the residential rural district from the village open space development definition. My understanding is that is a clerical error that remains in the bylaw, and we would propose to delete that. So that's just an aside, but that's something that we would be proposing to do. The next thing we would be proposing to do is to amend section 2013 to add the waterfront district in the definition, so it would be possible to propose village open space development in the waterfront district in the definition sections. And then there are only a few kind of minor changes to the existing language of the village open space development district, which is set forth in Section 207-5. And those are kind of simply adding to subsection D, the waterfront district is a location where you could propose village open space development. We're adopting the very same setbacks that already exist in areas where village open space development already is permitted. And we are adding a section where we would limit the development to one development or one dwelling unit per 20,000 square feet. And the reason we selected that is because it's no more dense than the abutting R20 SL district, which is located just to the west of this area. And it seemed to make a lot of sense that it not be overly dense and be consistent with what we see in the immediate area where we're proposing to do this. We think this is a reasonable proposal because much of the land in the waterfront district is already developed or town-owned, and we think this creates probably the most advantageous process to discuss development of any remaining parcels. We certainly couldn't rule out the fact that somebody else may wish to redevelop an existing property, but there aren't a large number of 4-acre parcels that remain in the waterfront district where someone could propose this, and obviously the density limitations prevent this from becoming overly dense. So this was certainly one of the options that we discussed with Mr. Hartman this summer, and we think it actually makes the most sense. So we would be looking for your support to see whether you would consider sponsoring the change, allowing town meeting to consider it. Obviously, you'd have another public hearing on another date and get more public input to the extent that that was desired, but we really don't think there'd be a lot of public opposition to this. And Mr. Drummond has already spoken with some of his neighbors in that area, and I know some of the neighbors thought this was a pretty responsible way to propose the redevelopment of the remaining land, and that's kind of the substance of our proposed changes. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. I brought extra copies of the maps in case you needed to see them, so you could identify where our property was and where the waterfront district existed. The current districts in town that allow it are the R20 MF, the R20 SL, and the R25. Those are the 3 zoning districts where village open space development is currently allowed. So this would be the 4th.
Thank you for that presentation. I'll bring it to Mr. Hartman.
So a few things to go over. So first of all, there is a typo in the bylaw that says RR is, these are allowed in the rural residential district. We have a reduced density development bylaw, which is very similar to this, but tailored for the rural residential areas. So it's not that we're eliminating this provision, it's just that there's a typo here and the RR does not belong in this section of the bylaw. It's used in the RDD. So what's being requested, and there are 2 things tonight, I think, that the applicant or the person before you tonight is looking either for your feedback and whether there's a willingness for you to agree to sponsor this article or if they should do it as a petitioned article. So again, any feedback you have on what they're proposing and then whether or not you're willing to support this, and we could put this down through the planning board, or if we would tell them to go ahead and file separately on their own. So again, the request is to use the VOSD, which is a bylaw the board is familiar with. We use it on a number of occasions. The Village Open Space Development Bylaw allows some flexibility. So this is a difficult site that they have to develop because it has limited access by way of right-of-way. There's limited options for how you could actually create frontage for this property. It's a very large piece of land that's there. So again, what the VOSD gives that kind of flexibility that allows the board to trade off density and the creation of open space, and maybe ideally in this case, since it abuts the ocean and abuts the rail trail, that it's open space deeded to the town, in return for allowing additional development there that otherwise might be a challenge using conventional zoning. It's a special permit through this board. 4 out of 5 members need to vote that special permit. And again, for this to be approved by town meeting, this to be approved, it does have to go to town meeting for approval too. What I thought I would do with your permission, and I would point out that the waterfront district, they've chosen a half-acre density for the density of development, which is consistent with the R20 zones. And if I could, I would like to share my screen and just run through the district on GIS so you can see the district and where we are. So I'm going to zoom in here, but this is Hedge Road right here as we look. This area up to the north is the Cottage Park property. As we zoom in, as we look at what's available here, this is the Jesse Marine's boatyard here. Some may be limited options if they ever decided no longer to have the boatyard. Then we have a handful of other single-family homes here. This property right here that we see with this is all part of the condominiums that are right next door. So you have the rail trail, the ocean, and then you have these condominiums. So this area right here, possibly something if the boatyard ceased. Then beyond that, you have this all as part of a special permit issued through the Zoning Board of Appeals already for multifamily. Then we come to the subject property, which is this piece right here with this open space associated with these 2 house lots. Access would be off of Atlantic Ave and then in through a 20-foot right-of-way to the property. And then as we go farther south, this is all land owned by the Trust for Public Reservation, trustees of reservation, so it's not developable, it's permanently protected. Then we come to the condos that are at the end of whichever street that is. And then we come to the town-owned Nelson Field property. So again, we have very limited options in this area for where it could occur. Then once we're past that in the waterfront zone here, again, some limited properties, not much. This is the rail trail. Caswell Lane in this area. Then we have the area where you have the office building, the old Ocean Spray building. And as we go, the other place there is a potential is we have the other Jesse Marine boatyard right here and the Cold Spring Club. That's a fairly large piece that's also waterfront that if those uses ever ceased, that could be a potential. Then as we go farther south, we have all town-owned land, Town Wharf, no real potential there. Then the waterfront stops until we pick it up again at the marina. And then we have the Yacht Club, which I guess could be another potential site if the Yacht Club ever ceased. Stevens Lane condominiums, and then we come to Stevens Field, and that's where the waterfront district ends. So again, fairly limited options beyond this property. There are potential for a few, but fairly limited options. And then if I could, I'll go back to this site, and I want to. Doing this by Wi-Fi is always a challenge, but. And then this will show you just the property that we're talking about. And as we look at the rail trail here, the 2 existing houses, and the open space here that is abutting the condominiums, but also the harbor. So if there was some potential development and we did it this way, the ability to create some permanently protected open space in this area would be interesting. We also, I would point out, is on Atlantic Ave, have condos that exist here, and then the higher density elderly housing also coming off of Atlantic Ave too. So again, I'm happy to show you anything else you want to look at, but I thought this was good just to give you an idea of the district and where the possibilities are. And that's what I have.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman. Before I bring it to the board, I'm going to entertain a little bit of public comment. And again, this is not the official public comment for something. I just know we have some people in the audience. And again, I want to stress that in front of us tonight is a request to change a zoning district. It's not a request for a specific project. We don't have a project here in front of us. I don't have a design, I don't have layouts, I don't have commentary from town departments. This is about changing the zoning. With that in mind, is there anyone in the room who would like to comment on that? Please step forward to the microphone and identify yourself for the record.
My name is Fred Healy. I live at 2 High Cliff, at one of those little boxes up there. Tom has been very sharing of his plans. And I know tonight isn't to approve a specific plan, but in order for his plans that he shared with us to happen, he needs the zoning changes. So my wife and I are in full endorsement of what it takes to get his plans going. Okay?
Thank you very much. Please step forward.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Mike Botieri, my wife Cheryl and I, we live at number 3, and we also fully support this. We realize there's no plan in front of you today, but we support we're hoping that not only does the board support, but also sponsors the article to town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Gary Tereski. I'm at 1 High Cliff. In fact, I was in front of this board a little less than a year ago, and the show of my house is up now. But the proposal that Tom has, and I think that getting this change is the first step to it, I think is going to add a lot of value to North Plymouth area with some wonderful, wonderful future waterfront homes. So I want you to know my wife Kathy and myself are 100% behind this proposal.
Thank you very much.
And I can
That's the
introduce
boss.
myself.
The boss.
Cheryl Botieri, 3
Hi.
High Cliff.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi. What we see in this wonderful waterfront area is outstanding. When we see what the rail trail has done for the waterfront area is outstanding. And when you look that people might have the opportunity to continue that rail trail and go up to that beautiful piece of land, to have this zoning change would be huge for the town, I believe. And I just look at all ages, all abilities, and it has truly made a difference. So continuing this waterfront district or zoning area, I'm hopeful that you're going to be in favor of this for town meeting and for our town.
Thank you very much. Anyone else in the room? Is there anyone on Zoom who'd like to be heard on this?
I'm not seeing anyone.
Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the board for questions. Start with Ms. Keene.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no concerns about this piece of land. I think that everything is amenable to the development that that is being proposed. My only questions have to do with actually the other pieces of land that Mr. Hartman pointed out, because in some respects this seems a little bit like a one-off, that we would be amending a bylaw only to advantage one piece of property, but we don't have a crystal ball about how it would impact other pieces of property, but it could in a way that we don't predict. I do have a question for Mr. Hartman or for anyone on the board. The state-owned land that is somebody not muted here?
Can we mute?
Could everybody check that they're muted? As I keep hearing some. Okay.
Yeah, we're,
I guess everybody's muted, huh? All right. So the state-owned land that is near the Mayflower, is that under a permanent conservation at this point, or is it just state-owned? owned.
So it's parkland, and it would be, I don't believe there's a conservation restriction on it, but it's parkland, and it's subject to what's called Article 97 of the state constitution, which says that you can't remove those things without a vote of the legislature and some kind of replication. But again, it is parkland, which has a level of protection similar to what I would say conservation land, not as strong as a conservation restriction. I would also say that that land is not in the waterfront zone. The waterfront zone in that area starts at the marina and goes south. So the state park property is all in the downtown harbor district, a different district.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because of some rumblings about the town acquiring it, et cetera, as opposed to the state. And I wanted to make sure that it wouldn't be under this. So thank you for your clarification, Mr. Hartman. That's all that I had to say.
So if I could, just one other thing that came to my mind as we were going through this. The waterfront district allows for multifamily development. So if you look at the condos at the end of Lincoln Street and Stevens, or just north of Stevens Field, those are special permit condos for multifamily. We have the Revere Copper and Brass site, special permit for multifamily. So when I started looking at this from a staff level and saying, am I concerned that by allowing this type of residential development, are we opening up, say, the Jesse's Boatyard for more development than they could do now? They already have the option for multifamily. The difference on this property is it has no frontage. And so this gives the board the flexibility to waive frontage requirements to do something here that normally would require variances to do anything on this property, unless they did something like combine it with the condos just north of the property, and then you could have a much higher density if you did that. So as you look at this and we think about this, multifamily is already allowed in the district at a far higher density than this would allow. This just gives flexibility for a lot like this that has a unique circumstance, which is very limited frontage.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman. Mr. Grandy.
Thank you, through the chair. I see this as, I'm having a tough time getting away from it, as spot zoning, just for one particular piece of property. I'm really having a tough time getting by that. And I know there's a lot more discussions that would happen through the different committees, being the steering committee, the town meeting members that live within Precinct 3 would certainly have something to say about it, and include all the residents that live in that area, in that whole waterfront district area. So I have some reservations. I'm not 100% against it, but I currently have some reservations, and I think it needs a lot of discussion. So those are my thoughts currently.
Thank you, Mr. Grandy. Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Lee, the current required area in the WF district, am I correct? It's 20,000 square feet?
I have to look. You mean for single-family homes?
Yes.
Yeah, so, and again, the density, as you can see, if you look at those condos just north of the property, the density for multifamily is, we generally go 1 unit per 6,000 square feet. So if it's single-family homes, then I'm going to, give me a second, but assume that it's 1 per 20 for single-family homes. But again, that multi-family provision in that waterfront zone allows for a much higher density.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at the dimensional table.
Yeah.
And I see that there's
Yeah.
for the other residential zones, but I don't see.
Yeah, so waterfront is 20,000 square foot, and it's silent as to whether it's residential or commercial. So the
Right.
minimum lot size is 20,000.
So without addressing the issue of frontage, just doing the division of square footage by 20,000 square feet would yield approximately 8 lots or 8 dwelling units, versus under 6,000 square feet, if my math is correct, it comes out to about 29 units.
And again, if there was some way, and I think there'd be real challenges, but if there was some way for the abutting multifamily owners to pick this up and add it, that's exactly the kind of trade-off we'd be looking at. I don't want to, there's a big grade change, there are retaining walls. I don't know how easy it would be for them to add it, but that is a good comparison of what you could do with the current zoning for multifamily if you had the frontage or access versus what you could do under this. And I would also tell you that any discussions I've had with these people from a staff level for support is much lower than eight units. We're down in the 5-unit range or less in the discussions I've had for what I think might be appropriate for this site.
I see.
Special permit, discretionary by the board, whole steps and steps ahead of where we are here. But even that 8-unit number you used, I think would be a high number for something that I would support on this site.
That usually just doing them
Yep.
straight math
Right.
yields more than,
Right, and I
doesn't
think-
account for
I think what
utilities.
comes
and
into play, and again, we're talking more about what would happen if they submitted a VOSD. What comes into play for me, at least, and my recommendation to the board is a trade-off between, well, you have some challenges here with limited access, limited right-of-way, probably don't want to have a high max density on this site because of those limited access. So let's talk about lower density, a more flexible way to get to the site, and more open space. And again, so I think hypothetically you could say 8 units, but when you look at the challenges of how you get to the site, we're talking about something that's going to be lower than that, at least from a staff standpoint.
I understand. That's the other question I have is in the waterfront district, is there a requirement for a percentage of open space?
No, the only unique requirement, and I don't think it's really constitutional anymore, is that they provide public accessibility along the front of their property. So if you look along a lot of the waterfront zone, you will see some of that publicly accessible walkways. I'd be really nervous about trying to require that. If they were mutually acceptable to do that, that's one thing, but I'd be really nervous on any development dictating that they have to provide public access, because recent court cases have said that that's not acceptable without compensation, unless it's mutually agreed upon.
I see. Interesting. So the advantage to granting or to ultimately town meeting approving this zoning change would be the flexibility of requiring the open space. And it sounds like it would be required to be open space dedicated to the town, so public access.
And again, we're a step ahead. I think we as staff in this location would push as hard as we could to ask them to donate the land to the town. But if it came down to it, there is no way that this board could require it. So if we can require that it's permanently protected open space, but if it's acceptable, the accessibility or whether it was gifted to the town or not, no guarantee on that piece.
Okay, so permanently protected open space does not necessarily mean open to the public?
Correct.
I understand. Okay, that answers my questions. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I'm going to join my fellow board members in raising the same concern. Before us is two different thoughts. We have a parcel of land, 4+ acres, that offers some potentially good opportunities for the town and some potential negatives if they are developed inappropriately. But we're not being asked to address that. What instead we're being asked to do is change an entire bylaw with potentially uncertain consequences throughout the waterfront district for the possibility of a future development that we may or may not agree with. One thing that people have to understand is even if this VOSD change was made, any developer could come before this board and ask for a VOSD, and we could say no. There's no requirement that we grant a VOSD approval. So all of this about a particular piece of property is very, very speculative versus making a substantive change to a bylaw. I also had concerns about the concept of spot zoning. It's, for those who don't understand spot zoning, the definition is, I can actually provide the legal definition. If my computer would behave a little faster. And let's see. Spot zoning occurs when there is a singling out of one lot for different treatment from that of accorded to similar surrounding land, indistinguishable from it in character, all for the economic benefit of the owner of that lot. That's the definition of spot zoning. And spot zoning is one of those very vague terms in which the answer is, you know it when you see it, sort of, because it is defined solely based upon the individual circumstances after standing in front of a judge and/or jury. So not a good outcome for anybody if you have to go through that route. Not something we want to deal with. So to some degree, we don't want to create something that someone else can later challenge as spot zoning. That doesn't help anybody. So now we get back to the question, what are we really looking at? We're looking at changing the zoning for essentially what we know to be the benefit, and even though it's a positive benefit for the town, potentially, but for one property owner. I haven't really heard, the problem that I have is I haven't heard how this particular change would benefit the town as a whole. When we make a zoning change, we make a change with the idea that it affects the town as a whole by addressing a need that the town has, not a singular piece of property. So the challenge that we're facing here, and I think I've heard it from my fellow board members, is we like the general idea as to what you're thinking about doing, and we would certainly like to engage in discussions to see if we could get to something that we all agree on because we think it's a good idea. But I think there's a real hesitancy to do it via a zoning change through this board, something that we have not really thought through in great detail going forward. Obviously, this is a first presentation to us, and Mr. Hartman's presentation via the GIS map is the first instance that we've really had to see as to how this might affect the town going forward. And if it doesn't affect the town elsewhere, then is this an inappropriate exercise of town authority? I'm not saying it is. I merely raised the question because I don't have the answer. And with that in mind, the question then raised is, okay, if what we're trying to achieve is the best possible development of this particular site, is there another way that we can go about doing that that is more definitive for this particular site rather than changing zoning for an entire district where we don't know what the potential ramifications are? So I'm going to refer that back to staff.
I would say that that's why we're here, because we went through a whole range of options. This lot has no frontage, and so it becomes problematic when you come in and say to this board, instead of 60-foot right-of-ways, we want to waive it to 20. Instead of 24 feet of a road, we want to waive it to something 18 feet. We want to maybe do a hammerhead turnaround. I'm not even sure what that would do. So you're waiving a level of waivers for your subdivision that we've never done before. And then they're going to be coming in for that special permit for multifamily, which again has none of those requirements for open space once you provided those waivers. As a condition of the waivers, you could certainly limit density. But again, as we were looking at it, all of those ways are less than clean, which is why when we talked about it, we thought the waterfront district allowing for the cluster development gives just the flexibility that you can't get for a lot like this that has limited frontage, or no frontage, I would say.
It's really a challenge because when we look at the checks and balances, the check on this is that this board, in whatever form it constitutes in the future, still makes the final determination as to whether or not to allow a VOSD. So if we change the zoning, or if town meeting changes the zoning, as we don't do that, if town meeting changes the zoning, that doesn't necessarily mean there will be other VOSDs. It merely means that there are other people who may apply for VOSDs.
If I could too, the other thing is I'm thinking about the discussions we've had, you would be responsible for the waivers of the subdivision to construct the road. The multifamily is a special permit through the Zoning Board of Appeals. So again, as we tried to figure out options, it all gets a little messy when you try to use the conventional zoning for this zone. And again, I think the difference here is that waterfront allows for residential development and for commercial development. And it's just something that we never considered at a staff level when we prepared these bylaws.
Question?
Please, Mr. Grandy.
Through the chair. Currently, the waivers or whatever would be required to accomplish something on this piece of property, you're saying, are insurmountable.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, I look at it and say that we as a staff, and my recommendation to you as a board is to be consistent. Once we start making those level of waivers in one place, there's no such thing as precedent. You don't set precedent. Each case is case by case. But again, I look at that and I get concerned that once this board waives their standards to essentially nothing, or almost nothing, I just get nervous about doing that once, and as soon as you do that, somebody else will come in with another great example where they want to do the same thing.
And if I may continue, currently, the waivers would be approved through the Zoning Board of Appeals.
No. So again, there are two issues here: legal frontage, and then the use of the property. So I think if they came in looking to build a road for access, that's through subdivision control. If they want to put a single-family house and somehow you could create enough frontage for the two existing lots and one more house, then they could do that by right. If they're looking for a higher density, it's a special permit through the zoning board. So again, that's why.
You see how sketchy this is?
How it gets complicated.
And how complicated it gets.
We also talked about there is a provision where the ZBA could determine that access is adequate. I'm not sure how they could do that with what's there, but they could do a special permit for access and a special permit for multifamily, no requirement for any.
And you had mentioned that there might have been a benefit to the town by working out some type of agreement, and those waivers might be able to be established through some type of coordination between the town itself.
Oh, certainly. I think if this doesn't go forward, they'll look at Plan B, whatever that is. But it's just not as clean as mandatory open space requirement and the flexibility you can get to waive some of those dimensional standards, which you can't do under local.
And a VOSD does not go to the zoning board at all.
No, it's the planning board.
So if we create a VOSD section within the waterfront district, anybody who doesn't want to go before the zoning board of appeals is going to try their best to go to a VOSD. So they go through the planning board instead.
But what they'll get is 1 unit per 20,000 square feet versus 1 unit per 6,000 square feet, and no requirement for
See how
open space.
complicated it gets?
So they could do that and come to you, but I would argue that that lower density of development is probably a preferred option for everybody versus the ZBA and a higher density. Like, again, I think you just need to look at the condos just north or on the other side of the railroad tracks on Atlantic Ave to see the density of development you could get through the multifamily provision. This is much lower density.
And why didn't we put a VOSD in that particular section originally when we created the VOSD?
I think up until this case and this piece of property, I was not even aware that there was this type of potential out here. Aware of it, we probably would have back when we did the VOSD.
Right. So again, a lot of discussion needs to be had, whether it's...
And when I say we would have, I mean staff would have recommended. It would be up to this board and the zoning board, as this board and town meeting, whether that's acceptable. But I think when we looked at the VOSD, if I knew some of this now, we probably would have put it in or recommended it be added.
Well, thank you. I don't have any more questions or comments. Thank you, Steve.
Mr. Gallen, please.
Thank you very much. I'm intrigued by the spot zoning argument. I happen to be a municipal attorney. I represent Marshfield, Orwell, Stoneham, some actually agencies within the town of Plymouth, and Union Point, which is completely rewritten its zoning. It's the former Naval Air Station in South Weymouth. And I would be actually willing to have that discussion with town council as to whether this would qualify as spot zoning, and I would suggest to you that I do not believe it qualifies as spot zoning, because what we're suggesting here doesn't just relate to Mr. Drummond's parcel. It relates to all of the land in the entire waterfront planning district, or the waterfront zoning district. And I would suggest, even in light of what Mr. Hartman just said, that there is a legitimate planning reason to offer this less dense development as opposed to a more dense multifamily development in exchange for the negotiation, I think, of what occurs in a VSOD for open space. And Mr. Hartman is correct. We have a potential open space parcel of 2 acres that would be consistent with my client's hypothetical development of the remaining land, and that would work with the density that we think is appropriate here. We are certainly amenable to public access to the beach here. And that's not, that's something we put on the table right from the beginning. That's not to encourage you to do anything, because that's not the project in front of you, but that's our vision, at least as it relates to this parcel. But we don't believe this would be a spot zoning, because it relates to all of the land in the waterfront district, and you've seen the extent of the district. Certainly, there's a lot of town-owned properties there. There's some trustees' property that's never going to be developed. But there are some marina properties that could be redeveloped, and those would also have the benefit of proposing less dense development with maybe a smaller roadway like we're envisioning here. And I appreciate your time and your consideration.
Thank you. So, Mr. Hartman, let me understand with respect to what's in front of us this evening. What are, am I correct that we have essentially 3 alternatives? We can either say that we are going to take this up as a planning board article before town meeting. We could leave this as a petitioned article and offer our support, or we could take no action whatsoever and allow the petitioner to proceed.
I would say the slight difference here, so you could agree to reserve the article, making it clear that without the benefit of a public hearing, which is required, that you don't have a position, but you're willing on behalf of them to reserve the article. Does not obligate you to support it. So first step is, do you reserve the article? Doesn't mean you support it. The second one is whether or not you support this. Again, I would urge you not to do that until after the public hearing. So I think it's, do you want to reserve the article on their behalf or not? Or, and again, make it clear that that does not indicate that you're supportive at this moment. That happens after the public hearing. Or do you want to say to them, file the petition, we'll advertise the public hearing, and then you'll make a recommendation to town meeting based on that petitioned article. So I think it's the 2 options.
Okay, with those being our 2 options, I bring it back to the board for any further comments or questions. Seeing none. Mr. Bennett,
Sorry.
please.
So I do think I heard your question, that how does this benefit the town as a whole? And I think I heard the answer that we have the opportunity to preserve a significant portion of that beautiful property as open space. I also think that I'm in agreement with Attorney Galvin, actually, which is unusual. Usually I agree with you. But that this doesn't really get the entire aroma of spot zoning, as it is an entire district. There are other parcels within the district that could benefit from this. I think Mr. Hartman's illustrations suggest that that is unlikely. However, several businesses would, it's not unheard of for a business to close and sell off the land. So I think for those reasons, I'd be prepared to make a motion if you're ready to entertain one.
To make a motion at any time.
That we, as Mr. Hartman suggested, that we reserve the article, if I have the language correct, which does not bind us to support it at this point. It just allows us to have more discussion, have there's a public hearing process, Lee, is that correct?
What will happen is sorry, thank you. We would notify the Board of Selectmen to add this article to the warrant, and then we would, starting tomorrow, start to figure out the public hearing process where we would advertise in the paper and hold the formal public hearing to consider a vote on this. I would also say that prior to that, before we had that hearing, we would be asking them to move forward in meeting with the North Plymouth and Plymouth Center steering committees too, to get their feedback prior to the public hearing.
I understood. So the long-winded motion that it is, I believe that more discussion beyond us as the 4 or 5 individuals is warranted on this, and I think it's a legitimate ask, and so the motion is to reserve the article.
I have a motion to reserve the article. Do I have a second?
I will second that, because more discussion needs to be had, as I said previously, and I want that discussion to happen, and I want to ensure there's a position on the warrant so that this can be heard properly.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Keen?
I have no further discussion on this.
Okay. Members?
Sure.
No? Okay. With that, I will call the roll. Mr. Grandy?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Ms. Keen?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Thank you very much for your thoughts tonight. I also would suggest, as you had raised, that you bring this to council so that we have just some sort of confirmation. Whether we feel one way or another is all well and good, but it's always nice to have the cover of council. Okay. Remaining on our agenda this evening is other business, which starts with the monthly master plan update. The master plan committee has an upcoming meeting scheduled for August
It's August 21st.
August 21st. I know that the agenda for that is we are going to be getting training on a meeting in the box, an idea that will allow the committee members to go out into the public and start holding some hearings and discussions with people, creating these pop-up listening sessions to get more public input. Obviously, anyone is welcome to attend the Master Plan Committee meetings and are encouraged. Additionally, one thing I'd like to add as a notice is, and as Ms. Montanari had mentioned, the police department has now created a program whereby there are police liaisons at every steering committee meeting. This is a phenomenal benefit to the community. As we talked about, the steering committees are the eyes and ears of the planning board and the select board, as there's a select board appointee on each steering committee as well, in the community. Yet another opportunity to hear where there are issues. And to that effect, the police department has also discovered that this is another great opportunity to hear from the community. So I encourage everyone to attend their local steering committee meetings to not only find out what is going on, but if they have issues, to be able to speak to the police liaison. They are terrific people, and they're all volunteers for those positions. They've chosen to be there because they really want to hear from and be part of their community. With that, any further announcements, notices?
Mr. Chairman?
Please, Ms. Geen.
Yes, I have an announcement tonight. I wanted to share with my planning board members and the citizens of the town of Plymouth that it's with great sadness that I will be resigning my elected position on the planning board, effective tomorrow when I notify the town clerk. I want to let everyone know that we are completing our move to Chicago. And you might see from my background that that's Chicago's lakefront. And so I also want to thank all of the citizens of Plymouth for their wonderful support of me during this time. My 5 years on the planning board, 2 years as alternate and 3 years as an elected member, a little bit over 3 years. And to the voters of Plymouth who had voted me in the first place. That's my announcement.
Well, again, thank you, Ms. Keene, for your service to the community, not just on this board, but on other boards and on other committees. Your absence will be noted, and you will be missed. But I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say we wish you all the best in your next endeavors back in your old hometown of Chicago, and your later hometown will wish you all the best with that.
Well, thank you. It's very possible that I'll be back, but at this point, I am in Chicago. So thank you all. It's been a pleasure serving with you, and particularly you, Mr. Hartman. I learned a lot working with you. I want to thank you for all the time and the commitment that you've given to me. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Keene.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky.
Is there anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
I have a motion
I have a second.
and a second. In favor, Ms. Keene,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Grandy?
Yes.
Myself, yes. This meeting of the Planning Board is adjourned.